Welcome to Collecting with Confidence, Art Investment Essentials, the Wellspire Advisors video series designed to help art collectors and investors navigate the complexities of art collecting and investment. In this video series, we'll break down key topics like art valuation, estate planning, and market dynamics with expert guests. And now, here's your host, Oliver Pursche.
Welcome to Collecting with Confidence, Art Investment Essentials, the Wellspire Advisors series designed to help art collectors as well as investors navigate this asset class. Today, we're joined with Caroline Schmidt, Fine Arts, who is an art expert, art consultant. We share some clients, and we're going to have a discussion regarding the art market in general, including now as market volatility is picking up, how it can be viewed as a long-term investments and the pitfalls that things need and other items that people should look out for. Caroline, welcome.
Thank you. Nice speaking with you.
Same here. So we share a client who's quite an established art collector. That's how we got to meet and know each other. But you work with all sorts of individuals, people who are starting to collect as well as very, very established. Tell us a little bit about what you do and why it's so important for somebody who's considering buying art to work with somebody like you.
Well, I work with people who already have established collections and need help refining what they're doing or management of their ongoing collection. And I help also people start totally from scratch and start collecting with having never bought a piece of art. And so it's really so those are two different sort of buckets. Somebody who's a new collector, you may have to help them identify their goals, what direction they want to take. It'll involve a lot of going to museums and galleries to even find the direction they want to take and see how much, also what their budget is, how much they're willing to spend, and if this is more of an investment strategy or just a pure pleasure buying. And then there are collectors that are already established who kind of have an idea what they want to do. And I will, for both groups, I help them identify what they should buy next or maybe what they should sell. I will help them figure out what is the best price, where is the best place to buy things for the right price.
Yeah, I mean, obviously there are auctions and there's galleries and then there's kind of private market sales, which can have very, very different dynamics, as I learned from you over the last couple of years. And maybe talk a little bit about that, about if you identify a piece or an artist that you want to start building and curating a collection around, how do you identify where the best place is?
It depends if it's a contemporary artist, if the artist is still painting and alive and working or sculpting, the best place may be right from a studio, right? Or right from the primary gallery, because that could also be potentially the cheapest entry point. Yeah. So then it's a lot about access. Like if it's a very desirable artist, then I can help get that access for somebody who may not have the relationship with the galleries. But if it's not a living artist, and if it's something that is more rare, we may want to look at auction, and a better venue would be to scour the auction markets and wait for the right work to come up and present itself, and also look through private collections that I know of who may want to dispose of something. So then it's really scouring the world for this particular opportunity. And this can take months, sometimes years, to find the right thing in the right place.
And so it's really about the inside knowledge of knowing where places where to go, where artists like to exhibit their pieces, or who's been collecting before. That's kind of what I'm hearing. Now, one of the things that you and I have spoken about in the past is also the pricing of art, and the fact that, and this is, I think, when you start looking at it as an investment as much as just a pretty thing on your wall or, in your home, that becomes very important. The three different types of values of art and the liquidity within the art market. Can you talk a little bit about that?
You're talking about insurance value, fair market value, and market value?
Yes, exactly. And what the IRS might want when you pass it on to heirs and look at it from an estate perspective.
Right. So the IRS may be looking at the fair market value, which is really the lowest of it all. Insurance value is normally 20%. It's a replacement value. And the fair market value is when you're forced to sell.
Yeah.
And market value is if you have time, you do want to sell.
Yeah.
And then you have the insurance value, which is really a replacement value, which if, you may not be able to replace something so easily. Some things are impossible to replace. So your insurance value is sort of roughly 20% maybe over your market value even.
Yeah. So one of the things, and this will probably spill into a second video series with you, but one of the things that I know concerns clients of ours as wealth managers when they have larger art collections that are very valuable is what happens when they pass away and their children don't necessarily want to collect the art. They're not as passionate about it as the parents or grandparents are. What are some of the strategies that you've come across there to address that within the family and guide them through that process?
So a lot of it will be in conjunction with their tax advisors and with financial advisors, right? So people will, depending on what their other financial situation is, will ideally create trusts that they put the artworks in. And they will have some sort of a succession plan and an idea of what they're going to do when they pass it on. And if the children do not want to or cannot keep the collection, that will then require a strategy of maybe gifting, which could be an advantage, and some depending on what the values are. So it'll be a combination of gifting, selling, and that will ordinarily be auction. And that is a guiding through legal advice,
Yeah, there's the
auction
complexities there.
strategy. There's a lot of complexities there.
Yeah, yeah.
And you really want to be in a position where somebody is not forced to make a very quick decision and not forced to sell overnight. So
Yeah, that's the liquidity component, because as we were talking about before we got started here, one of the complexities in art is there's not always a market, or at least not the market that you want there to be for pieces. And so obviously you can borrow against the value of the art, but I think managing from a portfolio perspective, managing how much art you're invested in, and consequently how much liquidity you need for taxes, is very, very important. Art lending is possible, but expensive from what I understand.
well, the banks, you get the cheapest rate from the banks, but they only will lend against about 50% of fair market value.
Yeah, so
That's, you're not gonna, from art lenders, the rates are pretty high, and I would strongly suggest that to avoid that,
yeah,
the auction houses also sometimes lend. They've made it a business, but you're not gonna get the most favorable rate from them. So if you have a portfolio with a bank, that's your best place to start. And a lot of people do that. A lot of my clients do it. they take loans against their art.
Yeah, which is, well, it's well collateralized, and you're really
Yes.
borrowing against your own credit worthiness at that point in time. Well, this has been great, Caroline. Thank you so much for joining us today. Any parting thoughts, give pieces of advice for somebody who's looking to build a collection as it pertains to the environment as it stands today? Certainly, it's a dynamic space like any other.
Well, as I said at the very beginning to you, is I think the number one thing is that you have to buy what you love. And within that framework, if you say, I'm going to identify what it is I love, and this is also should be giving you joy, you then find the right opportunity that is also a sound investment.
Thank you, Caroline. Caroline Schmidt, Fine Arts. Want to thank you again for joining us, and look forward to spending more time together and inviting you back to a future episode. And we're back with Caroline Schmidt. Last time we spoke with you, Caroline, we talked about the various ways that you work with clients and how you can help them through the auction process, galleries, identifying private sales. And I thought this time around we'd spend a few minutes and talk about a real live case where you've worked with a client and how you've had a meaningful impact with them. With that, take it away, Caroline.
Okay. So I can give you an example of one of my typical client profiles. It was somebody who was referred to me. He was a tech executive who moved to New York and had bought a big loft and wanted to spend about $1 million on artworks, and didn't know where to start, where to begin, what to even look at. And he was sent to me by a friend and said, this guy needs help. So what we did is first we sit down and we have an initial consultation and come up with the strategy, which means identifying key factors as in what's his taste, right? So we go through a whole bunch of images and see, okay, what kind of taste does he have? He had a modernist, this modernist loft. So it was pretty clear that he liked more abstract contemporary works. We figured out the budget, which was $1 million. And then it came to sort of risk aversion profile, what he wanted to spend on more blue chip artists and what he wanted to allocate to more emerging artists. And in most cases, as in this case, he sort of came to the conclusion it was better to have like a 800K, 200K split.
So really, well, since this is a WealthSpire sponsored blog, it's an asset allocation within the art market, just like you would with any other portfolio, is what I'm hearing.
Exactly. And once you sort of figure out, okay, this is how we'll split the funds. What am I looking for? You identify a bunch of artists in both of those categories. What is more blue chip and what is emerging art? And you start the education process. So I did take this client to all the local art fairs, even one international art fair, then an art fair in Miami. You want to look at as much as art as possible. We went to a bunch of museums. We obviously visited a lot of galleries in New York, and it sort of crystallized the taste a bit more and also what he really had to spend. And we decided he was going to buy only 2 works for the $800,000 and sort of more 5 works on the $200,000 allocation.
On the emerging side.
On the emergent side.
And how long did that process take of going through the galleries, going to the auctions and the art fairs? I imagine it's a lot of work and takes quite some time.
I mean, I think at the end it took us probably a year to buy all these works, because also you don't want to rush it. You want to take your time, because also when you're just starting out, you're taste is still forming, and maybe the things that we looked at in the first month are not the things he liked 3 months later. So there is was also a slight shift in taste the more things you see. So you do want to take your time. And I encourage all of my clients to take their time when we're looking at things.
Yeah, especially as the art market can be volatile in the short term. And so, buying something today, if you change your mind 3 months from now, can be expensive.
Yeah, well, if you buy within that was the idea of that asset allocation, right? So the idea is if, the two works we bought were pretty significant and they were by blue chip artists that have a market that's been steady for the last, call it 10, 20 years at least, if not longer. I mean, if you buy, there was a Picasso drawing also involved, which was ended up in the bedroom, which did not fit into the more abstract realm, but it ended up in the bedroom. But those are things that are, you can trade if you need to, or you can, you get your money out pretty
There's a market for it.
quickly. There's a market, and there is sort of a steady appreciation of, I would say, roughly about 5% a year. Okay. If you look over the years. Anyway, so we identified these works and we bought something through a private dealer that does not have a public space. And I knew he had this particular work. And I provide the market research of what comparable works sell for at auction. What other, obviously we saw what other dealers had. I knew what there was in private collections, and then we negotiated a price. And I feel that, we did particularly well on this one particular piece because the dealer was a little desperate and we got a 15% reduction.
Which at those dollars is meaningful in terms of what you save. And it sounds like that's something that the client would not have been able to achieve on their own.
No, and I don't think he would have even known how to look for those dealers, for those opportunities at all, because these are not people that appear at art fairs or have public spaces. Yeah. I mean, these are relationships I've built over 30 years, and that means I've scoured the market, like high and low beforehand. And then, we found something at auction that we ended up ultimately bidding on. And, I provide the research. We get condition reports. We look at past prices. I see beforehand if there's what the competition is. And we agree on, what's the highest price, what's the maximum bid. And I hopefully also can keep people from not going too high because you can get carried away. So there has to be some discipline. So I'm sort of the disciplinarian.
Yeah, we talked about that separately. We talked about that separately, and the importance, especially when you get to auction, that as the bidder, that the person who's looking for the art can get carried away emotionally and saying, no, I want to outbid this person, and ultimately do themselves harm. And that's another way where working with you or somebody like you, people can really have an impact on their collection.
Well, and also, people tend to forget that there's a 27 or 26%, depending on the auction house, buyer's premium to be paid.
Yeah.
And that's not insignificant. When you're bidding, you think, oh, this is not so much, but you get the final bill. So you have to keep on, doing the math, or ideally I put an Excel sheet together before and say, this is where this will end up. So your increments.
Yeah.
So anyway, so that was, so we bought two pretty major blue chip works. And then we started looking through contemporary galleries on what to buy on the more emerging market side. And what I bring to the table in that case is that I introduce the client to the artist, number one, but I also have these long-standing relationships with the galleries, and a lot of it is access. So if there's a long waiting list for an artist, they will give me access because I've done business with them for the past 20 to 30 years, or I have, not to age myself, or I have,
So for the last decade, you've done business with them.
exactly, or I have, I have bought from them enough work over the years that I am really their client at this stage. So which I will provide then to a new client, those relationships that I will, they will get the attention. And they will get the piece that has a waiting list, and they will get access to those artists. And I can say, listen, there's going to be a museum show coming up, and this artist is going to be in a group show and at the Guggenheim in Venice or at the Pinot Foundation. So I think there's upside in buying this artist.
Yeah, and that's the type of market intelligence that the typical, even very knowledgeable collector doesn't have, because, as I'm sure is the case with the tech executive that you represented there, they have a day job. They're busy doing other things than thinking about where this specific emerging artist may showcase next and how that may play into things. So clearly a big advantage in working with you. Yeah, that's terrific.
But there was actually, so it was funny. So the guy was very interested in planes, and he wanted to have one image of a plane. And there's a famous photographer, there are famous photographers that take pictures, contemporary photographers that are famous for their plane pictures. And he really wanted one. And this falls under the emerging artist sort of category. And on the primary market, meaning straight from the studio to the gallery to the client, this type of work was about $80,000. But if you know the market well, I knew that in this case, there was not a waiting list. And on the secondary market, you could buy them for $30,000 if you just waited and bought it either at auction or from a gallery. And I did find eventually a distressed seller who had exactly the work we wanted. And I think we spent $25,000, which had we gone to the gallery would have cost him 80. So what, so what is that work worth today? It's probably worth what he paid, but it's an image he really wanted. It's a piece he wanted in the collection. He wanted an image of a plane, and we bought it at the lowest possible price.
And as is the case, and when you spoke about this when we spoke last, art, it's about collecting. It's about buying something that hopefully appreciates in value, but it's also buying something that you love and want to look at and admire on a regular basis. So clearly, it sounds like you did that with this client at a very good and favorable price.
So you have to, at the end of the day, you want to end up with something that you have to love the work, right? If you don't if I would not have done a good job if I don't identify together with the client things that they actually want to live with and that they enjoy looking at every day. But I also want to protect I want to protect the asset. So, and so that's all in the allocation, and it's in the smart buying at the end of the day. And markets will go up and down, and if you don't, have to sell, then I would think that most of my people have actually done very well over, when you look at it over 10 years. Yes, some things will go down and some things will go up, but if you look at their overall portfolio, it has to work.
Great. This is awesome. Thank you, Caroline.
Thanks for listening or watching this video of Collecting with Confidence, Art Investment Essentials, presented by Wellspire Advisors. If you have any feedback or questions, including suggestions for future topics and guests, reach out to us directly or send us an email to clientrelations@wealthspire.com.